Imagine being born with no name. Not unnamed yet, not we'll figure it out later. No word for you exists anywhere on Earth. Nobody has decided what sound your entire existence is going to be attached to. No parents, no language, no system, nothing. Just you, a brand new human, completely undefined. That was true for every single person who has ever lived. For some stretch of time between being born and the moment someone, somewhere, finally looked at you and decided. Here's the question almost nobody actually stops to ask. Who was that someone? How did they decide? And somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, before writing, before most of language as we'd recognize it, the very first human had to make that decision with absolutely no instructions, no precedent, nothing to copy. So how did that actually work? Let's go back. Way back, to a point before any of the naming systems we'd recognize today existed. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups like the Hadza of Tanzania or the San peoples of southern Africa, have found something that gives us our best window into how this probably started. In these societies, names are almost never random. They're descriptive. A name might reference the weather on the day someone was born, an animal that was nearby, an event that happened in the camp that week, or a physical trait the baby already had. Names weren't decorative, they were functional. A name was a tiny piece of information, encoded into a sound, that told the whole group something true about that person. Researchers studying these naming patterns believe this is close to the oldest layer of human naming behavior we can still observe, a living fossil of how it probably worked 70, 80, maybe 100,000 years ago. But wait, if names were just descriptions, what happened when two people in the same group had basically the same description? Two babies born in the rainy season. Two kids who both happened to be near a fire when something memorable happened. This is where it gets interesting, because the answer is that early naming wasn't actually about uniqueness the way we think of it today. In many small-scale societies, names were expected to repeat, expected to overlap, because the name's job wasn't to make you a one-of-a-kind individual. Its job was to place you, to tell people what role you played, what story you were already part of, before you'd even done anything yet. Some cultures solved the overlap problem by attaching a second layer, a place name, a parent's name, a clan marker, stitched onto the personal one, which is, when you think about it, the literal ancestor of the surname. We didn't invent last names for bureaucracy first. We invented them because two people in the same valley both got called Rain. Now here's the part that tends to surprise people the most. In a huge number of ancient and indigenous cultures, a name wasn't fixed for life. It changed. A child might carry one name through infancy, then receive an entirely new one after surviving a dangerous illness, after a first successful hunt, after a major life event that the community decided mattered enough to mark. Among several Native American nations, individuals could earn new names multiple times across a lifetime, each one reflecting who they had become, not who they were when they were born. In parts of West Africa, naming ceremonies held days after birth gave a child their first name, but later achievements, titles, or even personality traits revealed in childhood could add to or replace it entirely. A name, in this framework, wasn't a label slapped on you once. It was a running biography. You weren't named, you were renamed, again and again, as you became more of who you were. And this connects to something almost unsettling if you sit with it. A lot of ancient cultures treated names as having actual power, not metaphorically, literally. In ancient Egypt, the soul was believed to need its name to survive in the afterlife, which is why Egyptians carved names into tombs and monuments over and over, sometimes dozens of times in a single burial chamber, as a kind of insurance policy against the person being forgotten. Pharaohs went further. Many had a true name known only to a small circle, specifically because they believed an enemy who learned it could use it in a curse to harm them from a distance. When a pharaoh fell out of favor after death, the response wasn't just to tear down statues. It was to systematically chisel the name out of every inscription that contained it, because removing the name was believed to functionally remove the person from existence, erasing them from both history and the afterlife at the same time. In several Aboriginal Australian traditions, the name of someone recently deceased could not be spoken aloud for a period of mourning, sometimes lasting years, and other community members who happened to share that name would temporarily go by something else entirely, because the name itself was considered too tightly bound to the person to use casually so soon after death. These weren't superstitions in the dismissive sense. They were serious frameworks built on a real psychological truth. A name is the closest thing language has to actually touching a person. So who decided all this? Who had the authority to name a child in the first place? The honest answer is it varied enormously. but a pattern shows up again and again across unrelated cultures on different continents. It usually wasn't the parents alone, and it usually wasn't random. Elders, grandmothers specifically, in a striking number of societies, midwives, or spiritual leaders were often the ones who named a child, sometimes based on a dream they had the night before the birth, sometimes based on which ancestor's spirit the community believed had just returned. Among the Yoruba people of West Africa, naming a child traditionally involves the entire extended family gathering on the 7th, 8th, or 9th day after birth, depending on the child's sex, for a formal ceremony where multiple names are given at once, each one chosen by a different relative, each one carrying its own hopes, its own warning, its own piece of family history. No single person got to decide alone, because no single person was trusted to see the whole picture. The act of naming was treated as too important to leave to brand new parents who were, understandably, slightly overwhelmed at the time. You needed a whole room of people who could see the pattern the baby was stepping into, because apparently nobody fully trusted just one set of eyes to get it right. Which also means a name can be taken from you, and history shows exactly how high the stakes of that really were. When European slave traders and later plantation owners forcibly renamed enslaved Africans, stripping away the names given to them at birth and replacing them with names chosen by their captors, it wasn't a paperwork convenience. It was a deliberate severing, an attempt to disconnect a person from their ancestry, their language, their family's memory of who they were before. The same pattern shows up in residential schools across North America and Australia, where Indigenous children have their names replaced almost immediately upon arrival, often with no explanation, as part of a deliberate strategy to disconnect them from their culture. If a name really is just a label, none of this makes sense. You don't go to that kind of effort over a label. You go to that kind of effort because everyone involved understood, on some level, that a name is load-bearing. Remove it, and you're not just changing a word. You're trying to collapse an entire structure of belonging that the word was holding up. Let's be honest about something, though, because it would be misleading to make this sound more poetic than it sometimes was. Plenty of ancient naming was also blunt, practical, even a little harsh by modern standards. In some historical European peasant communities, children who died in infancy were sometimes given to the next child born, reused, not out of coldness, but because names were a limited resource and grief needed somewhere to go. In other contexts, names were assigned almost administratively, tied to birth order, with the fifth son simply called the word for fifth. It wasn't always sacred. Sometimes a name was just logistics, a way to keep track of who was who in a world without paperwork. Now stretch this out across the planet and the variety gets genuinely wild. In ancient China, a person could carry several different names across one lifetime depending entirely on context. A childhood milk name, often deliberately humble or even unflattering, was believed to ward off the attention of jealous spirits who might otherwise target a baby that seemed too obviously precious. Later, a formal name was chosen for use in society, and on top of that, a separate courtesy name was adopted in adulthood, used only by peers and equals, never by elders or strangers. Using the wrong name for the wrong relationship wasn't a small slip. It was a social violation, because each name carried its own permission level for who was allowed to say it. Meanwhile, in ancient Rome, a citizen's full name could carry 3 separate parts: a personal name, a clan name, and a family branch name, essentially a built-in genealogy you carried around in your own mouth every time you introduced yourself. Say a Roman's full name out loud, and you just recited their entire lineage. In Iceland, a system that still functions today and traces back over 1,000 years skips surnames almost entirely. Instead, you take your father's, or in modern practice, sometimes your mother's, first name and attach a suffix meaning son of or daughter of. Every generation rewrites its own connection, rather than inheriting a frozen family name passed down unchanged. And in parts of Indonesia and the Philippines, some traditional naming customs went even further than China's milk names, deliberately giving infants names tied to misfortune, sickness, or even insults, specifically to trick evil spirits into ignoring a child they'd otherwise want to harm. A baby called something close to trash or ugly one wasn't being mistreated. They were being hidden in plain sight, disguised in the one place spirits were believed to be listening, the name itself. None of these systems agree on what a name is for, and that's exactly the point. They're not variations on one universal idea. They're independent answers, invented by unconnected civilizations, to the same underlying problem. Which brings us to the wider point. Every single naming system we've talked about, the descriptive names, the earned names, the secret names, the inherited ones, the practical practical ones, is solving the exact same problem your brain solved in 3 seconds when you met someone new. How do you take an entire human being, their history, their role, their story so far, and compress it into a single sound you can hold on to? That's what a name has always been. Not a label, a compression algorithm for a person. And maybe that's why it still matters so much today. Why getting someone's name wrong feels like a small failure. Why remembering it feels like respect. You're not just learning a word, you're doing the oldest social ritual humans have. Every single person you've ever met started out exactly the way you did, completely undefined, no word for them anywhere in the world, until someone decided. You weren't born with your name, you were given the first thing anyone ever decided about you, before you could talk, before you could object, before you'd done a single thing to earn it. We've been doing that to every newborn human for as long as there have been humans. So the next time someone tells you their name, that's not small talk. That's the oldest decision in the world, still being made, right in front of you.